All right, let's just dive right into this explainer and dissect what is, without a doubt, the most famous murder in human history. We're traveling back to the heart of ancient Rome to witness a moment that literally ended an era. Picture this. A man is standing on the Senate floor, completely surrounded by his closest friends and political allies. And then, out of nowhere, he is brutally stabbed 23 times. It's a scene of just unimaginable chaos and betrayal. But here's the thing. The deepest wound of that fateful day, it didn't actually come from a physical blade. No, it came from a single look at the man holding one of those knives. Because when Julius Caesar looked up and saw exactly who was attacking him, it prompted his heartbreaking, unforgettable final words. "You too, child?" So, looking at the evidence, a massive question emerges about the man behind that specific blade. Brutus. We all know the name, right? We've all heard the phrase, "Beware the Ides of March." But we really need to ask ourselves today, was Brutus a noble patriot rescuing a republic from a tyrant? Or was he a cold-blooded traitor who martyred his own mentor just to grab a seat at the table of power? Let's get right into Section 1, the dictator's golden boy. To truly grasp the sheer magnitude of this betrayal, we first have to understand the incredibly deep, almost father-son bond that existed between these two men. In fact, wild rumors were swirling around Rome that Brutus might have actually been Caesar's biological son, the product of a long-running affair Caesar had with Brutus's mother, Servilia. Now, whether they actually shared blood or not, it is a historical fact that Caesar absolutely adored the guy. A crazy example of this, years earlier, Brutus actually fought on the opposing side of a civil war against Caesar. But instead of executing him as a traitor, which was standard practice, Caesar explicitly ordered his soldiers not to touch Brutus under any circumstances. And after it was all over, Caesar forgave him, promoted him, and elevated him to be one of the most powerful men in all of Rome. And that right there brilliantly illustrates Brutus's agonizing internal conflict. By 44 BC, the dynamic had completely shifted. Caesar had just been named dictator for life, a title that, to Roman senators, basically meant he was a king in everything but name. And Rome absolutely hated kings. So picture Brutus here. He deeply loves the man who favored him, but that love is clashing directly against his own family's proud, defining legacy of driving ancient kings out of Rome. He loved the man, sure, but he was completely convinced he had to hate the tyrant. Which brings us to Section 2, the psychological trap. That crushing internal pressure made Brutus the absolute perfect target. You see, this betrayal didn't just start with the knife. It started with whispers and the shadows, all orchestrated by a bitter, jealous senator named Cassius. Cassius was the true mastermind of the plot, but he knew the Roman people would never accept the murder unless the quote-unquote most honorable man in Rome was leading the charge to legitimize it. So Cassius orchestrated this masterful, multi-step manipulation to break Brutus down. First, he subtly stoked Brutus's ego. Then, he went as far as planting fake anonymous letters on Brutus's desk in the dead of night, making it look like the everyday citizens of Rome were begging for a new liberator. And finally, he constantly weaponized Brutus's family legacy against him, always reminding him of his ancestors who overthrew kings. What's truly fascinating here is how Brutus fell into the ultimate psychological trap. We actually have accounts of him pacing his villa at night, totally unable to sleep, slowly convincing himself that he wasn't betraying a beloved friend at all. No, instead, he framed it in his own mind as a tragic but entirely necessary sacrifice of one man to save an entire nation. He somehow convinced himself that the sheer horror of the act would be completely washed away by the nobility of his motive. Moving right along to Section 3, the Ides of March. It's March 15th, 44 BC, at the Theater of Pompeii. With his mind finally made up, the trap was set for the bloody climax of this story. When you look at the timeline of that specific day, it honestly seems like the entire universe was screaming at Caesar to just stay home. He had received that famous warning from a soothsayer to beware the Ides, and his wife woke up terrified from vivid nightmares of him dying right in her arms. And you know what? Caesar almost listened to them. But the conspirators were so organized, they actually sent a supposed friend to his house to mock his fears and talk him into going to the Senate hall anyway. When Caesar finally arrived and walked into that hall, the assassination didn't start off like some clean, coordinated military strike. Not at all. It began as a chaotic, incredibly messy struggle. The senators crowded around Caesar, pretending to present him with a petition just so they could get close. And when that first blade struck, Caesar didn't just give up. He fiercely fought back against the mob, even using his little metal writing stylus as a makeshift weapon to defend himself. But the fight abruptly ended when the crowd parted and Brutus stepped forward. When Brutus plunged his hidden dagger into Caesar's groin, all of Caesar's resistance just instantly evaporated. He didn't even shout for help. Realizing the ultimate betrayal by the man he practically viewed as a son, Caesar simply pulled his toga over his head so he could die with dignity. He fell right at the base of the statue of his old rival Pompey, his life ending completely soaked in the blood of the men he had called brothers. Which leads us to Section 4, the price of betrayal. Brutus and the rest of the conspirators literally walked out of that theater fully expecting the Roman public to cheer for them. They truly believed they had instantly birthed a reborn republic. But instead of parades and gratitude, they triggered immediate and catastrophic consequences that changed the world forever. So what actually happened? Well, because Caesar was deeply beloved by the Roman poor, who saw those senators as elitist murderers rather than liberators, the initial shock and public silence very quickly turned into fiery, violent riots. The assassins were immediately forced to flee the city of Rome just to save their own lives. Far from saving the Republic, their quote-unquote noble act ignited another brutal decade of civil war. And how did it all end for our conflicted assassin? Well, Brutus ultimately faced Caesar's heirs at the Battle of Philippi, realized his cause was completely lost, and took his own life. In the 2,000 years since that day, history has never really decided how to judge Brutus impartially. If you look at classical literature, Dante placed Brutus in the absolute center of hell, literally being chewed on by the devil himself for all eternity alongside Judas Iscariot. Yet, on the absolute other end of the spectrum, plenty of historians and philosophers view him as a beautifully tragic hero, a man who made the ultimate painful sacrifice, putting the freedom of his country above the love in his heart. In the end, Brutus gave humanity the ultimate template for betrayal. He proved rather chillingly that the most dangerous enemy in the world is the one who genuinely thinks they are doing you a massive favor by stabbing you in the back. It leaves us with a pretty profound question to think about. Does a pure motive ever truly justify the ultimate betrayal? Is loyalty to a person more important than loyalty to an ideal? Think about where you stand on that. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history you think you know.